Hello everyone, Derek Barefoot back with you on the Typologetics YouTube channel with my wife May. Source criticism of the Bible, analyzing sources in the Bible. We've been in the book of Daniel, talking about how that book was put together, when it was put together, how can we tell. We'll get into more of that tonight. Let's open with prayer. Father, thank you for the peace that you give us through Christ Jesus. Give us wisdom also and discernment of your will in all things through his name. Amen. All right, so last time we talked about the dating of Daniel in more detail. The dating, Daniel, I should say, dates the beginning of the story to the third year of King Jehoiada of Judah, when it says there was a siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, there was the looting of the temple, taking of the objects out of the temple, and exiles back to serve in Babylon. And the problem with that is that the siege actually happened in the 8th to 9th year of Nebuchadnezzar, and in the 11th year, or even shortly after that, of King Jehoiada. We read in 1 Kings that account. And so what I explained was, and there are just so many difficulties with trying to make that work as an exact chronology. The third year of King Jehoiakim of Judah was the first year of King Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel has this very Gentile empire focus in the book on the rise and fall of Gentile empires, the large sweep of human history that was going on with their coming and their going. Of course, that had an effect on Israel, but it's got that perspective. It's kind of got that focus with Israel somewhat in the background, except as represented by Daniel and his companions. And so it pushes Nebuchadnezzar's siege to the beginning of his reign as part of that focus. It kind of makes Nebuchadnezzar's reign this defining era of history for the background of the book. So if you go back to Daniel 1:1, May's here to read for us, and if you go to the last verse again of chapter 1, May, you'll notice what it says there, if you read it for us.
Chapter 1:21.
Uh-huh.
And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king.
Okay, until the first year of Cyrus the king. And you'll notice this is after it says that Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed with Daniel and his companions, their wisdom was better than all of his other wise men. It almost implies that Nebuchadnezzar's reign goes right up till the first year of Cyrus. And you get that it literally says that Daniel was until the first year of Cyrus the king. You might conclude that Daniel's life ended there, but at the very least, that wouldn't be in harmony with some of the other statements later when Daniel's still alive after the first year of Cyrus, later in the book. But Cyrus is the Persian king who defeated the armies of Babylon and captured the city of Babylon. And that Babylonian period of dominance that's so closely associated with Nebuchadnezzar, he was not the only king during that period, but his was the longest reign when the Babylonians were, reigning over Judah, had Judah in exile for a good part of that time. And there's another reason why this first year of Nebuchadnezzar, third year of Jehoiakim, is such an important starting point to kind of peg things to in Daniel. And that is if we go back to Daniel chapter 9. And we'll look at chapter 9, verse 2. We'll go ahead and read verses 1 and 2.
In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the numbers of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years.
Okay, and that is in Jeremiah. We're not going to go right now and look at where that occurs. We'll do that later. But in the book of Jeremiah, it said that 70 years of desolations would be fulfilled upon Jerusalem and Judah, and it was approximately 70 years from the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, that third year of Jehoiakim, until Cyrus came. So Nebuchadnezzar came to the throne of Babylon, became king of Babylon in 605. We know very well established from many sources, interlocking dates, that Cyrus defeated the Babylonians, captured Babylon in the year 539. So if you count between 539 and 605, so 539, so then you've got 61 years. 61 years plus 5 years, got 66 years. Then if you count 1 year on either end, so you got 66 to 67 years, let's say that. But the Jews did not return. They were not free to go back to their homeland immediately after Cyrus defeated the Babylonians and ended the Babylonian Empire. It was another couple of years before they returned. So then you're at 67, you're up to 69 years. So you're right at, or maybe just a little short of, depending on how you want to count the time for them to get to the land and settle in. That actually happened in dribs and drabs. But the first resettlers that went from Babylon, it was right about 70 years from the start of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And so that captivity represented by taking those exiles, Daniel wants to conform that to this 70-year period, just approximate it to it. So there's a reason for it. Like I said, this is history with a figurative slant for a spiritual purpose. And that 70-year period is really important to sort of have as this template. Then it's going to be built on, in chapter 9, by 70 weeks of years, 70 times 7. So it's going to get further elaborated. But that 70 and this Gentile perspective in Daniel, sort of focus on the rise and fall of Gentile empires. That 70 goes back to the table of nations in Genesis with the 70 nations. Also in Judges, the 70, Canaan is represented, the land of Canaan, as being under 70 kings. And it's kind of a microcosm of the Gentile world in a particular way. So that number 70 is 7 times 10 is a key number symbolically in Daniel in a lot of ways, and it's helping to dictate the framework. So it doesn't mean that it's not completely divorced from the chronology of actual events. But it's been idealized or stylized a little with that symbolism in mind. And that is part of the way in which Daniel has been put together. That is, it helps us to see that Daniel was assembled from, I think, older materials older than the time when it was put together. There's a lot of these stories later are incorporated into the book, and in the process of kind of piecing that book together from stories and visions and so on, these symbolic aspects were important in getting that done, in doing that job. And that helps to point us maybe toward a later date, and that's a kind of a controversial idea, but a later date of Daniel than we might assume from reading some of the statements in Daniel. But we will be getting into that more as we go along. Right now, let's go back for a moment and think about this idea of Nebuchadnezzar's reign being so important as a definer of the desolations of Jerusalem, the captivity of Judah. Because Nebuchadnezzar's reign was the longest. There were a few Babylonian kings who followed him. Their reigns were much shorter than his. His was 40-some years, and theirs were just a few years each. We were in Daniel 2 earlier, where the king has this dream of a large statue representing a series of empires in the ancient Near East. We read some of that. I want to go back to it again for a particular purpose connected with this. So let's turn over one page from Daniel 1, or back from Daniel 9, I should say, back to Daniel 2. And let's look at it again. If you would read for us Daniel 2, 31. Let's go ahead and read 31 through 33.
You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thigh of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay.
Okay, you can stop there. So this great statue, different metals, the head was of gold here, the chest and arms of silver, and so on. These different metals. This was a popular way to represent the march of empires in the ancient world, not just in the Bible, but in Greek sources you find this same. It's where we get this term, the Golden Age, referring to some pleasant time in the past, that's looked back on fondly. Okay, so partly it comes from this idea that there was an age of gold, and then these materials, they become less precious as you go through gold, silver, bronze, iron. The metals become less precious, but harder and better for weaponry. And there's sort of a message there. By the time you get iron is the least precious, but it's the most destructive. That is, if you make a tool or a weapon of iron, it's a lot more formidable than a weapon made of gold, a soft material, or even silver, or even bronze. So there's a little bit of some, symbolism working a couple of ways when you look at that. But now go down to the interpretation again in verse 36. So, if you would read 36 and 37.
This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory.
Okay. And then he says that he rules over everyone, wherever men dwell. Of course, and again, this is not literally the case. He didn't rule over, whoever's living in China or Indonesia or the Americas, at that time. They obviously weren't under the king of Babylon. But it's the world of their experience at the time. The sort of the limit of their those people, their horizons and interests. It was, that entire world that it's referred to in verse 38. So now go down to 39, and if you would read that.
After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. Then another kingdom of bronze.
Third kingdom.
Oh, and another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth.
Okay. And then it mentions a fourth kingdom. All right, so now if you see what's happening here, it says, after you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. And it is up in verse, I should have had you read 38, hon. We skipped 38. But let's go back to 38 and read that now.
And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold.
Okay, that's the line I was looking for. You are the head of gold. So you are the head of gold. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. Now notice what it's doing. It's actually identifying the Babylonian Empire with Nebuchadnezzar, as if, he is the empire. When he's gone, the empire is gone. The head of gold is not, it doesn't say you and some successor kings are the head of gold. It says you are the head of gold. And after you, there will arise. Like, it's seamless. There's Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire. It's the same thing. And then arises another empire. Nebuchadnezzar is personally being made to... the entire dynasty of the Neo-Babylonian Empire is being personified in Nebuchadnezzar. Even though that will not literally be true. There will be other kings after him before there's a new kingdom to replace Babylon. It's, as we covered, remember we covered this whole idea that sometimes the actions of one figure in the Bible, it's attributed to a figure, but the actions are actually performed by someone later who's connected with them. So we have the example we looked at in a previous study of how in the book of Acts chapter 7, when Stephen's telling the story of Israel, he says that Abraham purchased a burial plot in Shechem in northern Israel, where Joseph was eventually buried. Abraham did not do that personally. He did it through his grandson, Jacob. Jacob was the one who actually made the purchase. But in broad terms, in biblical terms, it's attributed to Abraham as if Abraham did it himself. Abraham made the purchase through his grandson. We have the example of Jesus. The centurion sends this delegation of Jewish elders. But when you read it in the book of Matthew, that's in the book of Luke, that's how it's presented. But in the book of Matthew, you have the centurion as if he's personally having this conversation. And when you read it in the book of Matthew, you just can imagine that the centurion is not there on the spot actually having that conversation. It's presented as though he is. And then Luke tells us, well, it's through these intermediaries, that he has sent, and then they vouch for him. Well, the actions of the Babylonian Empire are going to be vested in Nebuchadnezzar, really, with one little exception. There's a story about Belshazzar, who was the crown prince acting as king for a short time, later on. But it's being wrapped up in him, and their actions, all of them, are kind of summarized in the person of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the first, the strongest, the longest reigning of the Neo-Babylonian kings. And I'll tell you why this is important. It's because as you go through the stories, Nebuchadnezzar's heart is greatly softened toward Daniel and his God and his people, by implication, of course. And this process goes on until Nebuchadnezzar is sounding almost like an Israelite, praising the God of Daniel. In fact, since we're right here in the second chapter of Daniel, look over after Daniel finishes with the entire interpretation, which we haven't read all of that. But if you go over to verse 46, if you could read verses 46 through 48.
Chapter 1.
No, chapter 2. So,
40.
yeah, 46 through 48.
The king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon.
Okay. So look at what, Nebuchadnezzar, this great Babylonian king who's the ruler of the whole known world at the time, he bows down before Daniel and burns incense to him. It's like a worshipful act. And said, "Surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings." In other words, he's paying the highest honors to Daniel and to his God. So turn back for a moment to the very first verse of this chapter. And May, if you could read that for us.
Chapter 1?
No, chapter 2, verse 1.
Now, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him.
Okay, so you'll notice, when is this located chronologically? In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, we've noted that, it's the second year, presumably because the first chapter, sort of this introduction of Daniel, happens at the beginning of his reign, the very beginning, like the first year. So then the next thing that happens is like the second year kind of fits the context given us by the events of chapter 1, when Daniel is introduced to the king and all of that. And all this is like I said, is dating from the beginning of his reign. So early in his reign this happens. Here's kind of the issue that presents if you want to be very rigid about the historical application of it. Nebuchadnezzar not only took items from the temple in the 8th to 9th year of his reign. Well, it's attributed to the first year of his reign earlier in chapter 1. He came back in 587 because he was unhappy with the king on the throne then, Zedekiah, the Judite king, presumably hiring the Egyptians to, take Babylon, get Babylon out of his land and out of his hair, so to speak. He came back, besieged Jerusalem again, slaughtered thousands of Israelite, Judite people, destroyed the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem, captured Zedekiah, and slaughtered his sons in front of his eyes, and then put his eyes out. We have this from the books of Kings and Chronicles. He brought this horrific destruction upon Jerusalem, and yet here he had been praising Daniel's God to the absolute limit. In other words, to picture him then going back and destroying the temple of this God and just killing, and a lot of civilians. It was prophesied in Jeremiah. We can tell the destruction was severe from the account in Kings, but in Jeremiah and in the book of Isaiah and in the book of Ezekiel, they say clearly that when the Babylonians were going to return and make war on Jerusalem again, it would be a tremendous slaughter of civilians in Jerusalem and its environs. Not absolutely everyone, but a lot of people were killed then. So this is kind of very hard to see how the same person at this time, that is at some early point was convinced that Yahweh was the God of all gods, and then he would destroy his temple, and kill so many, even if he was unhappy with the king, and there would be such a great slaughter in Jerusalem. It's hard to kind of square those things up. But what is true is that over time, the Jews became more settled and successful in Babylon, and the opinion of them rose among the Babylonians all the way up to the Babylonian court. That is sort of the stock of the Jews seems to have steadily risen along with their situation, even their prosperity, to where it was such that at the time when they could return to their land, some of them were more comfortable remaining behind in the Jewish colony, in effect, that they had created in the area of Babylon. And it was kind of those who were a bit adventurous, ready to face some hardships, that would go back and return to the land to reestablish worship in the land. And so this gets to kind of, like I say, that this has been planned out according to a theme that's tied to history, but you can't be too, like I say, exact and rigid about the application. So here's another example. If you turn over to Daniel chapter 7, so let's go to Daniel chapter 7 and verses 3 and 4. And we'll be looking at some of these again later, but okay, Daniel 7, 3 and 4.
And 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. Okay.
There is a story about how Nebuchadnezzar loses his sanity. We will get to a bit more of that later on. And then, that God says that he's going to do this to him. He's going to cause him to lose his sanity. Then later he's going to restore his sanity to him and restore his throne to him. And usually this verse, because the lion here with the eagle's wings is clearly Babylon. It is in context. It represents the Babylonian Empire. And the standing up on 2 feet like a man and given a human mind, that's usually attributed to Nebuchadnezzar recovering his sanity. And I'm not so much going to say that that's 100% a wrong interpretation. There's something larger behind this, and that is that rising respect for the Jews over time that was not limited or confined to Nebuchadnezzar. So to show this, go back to 2 Kings, and then we'll have to end at this point. But the end of 2 Kings, and this is after the terrible destruction is recited and events attending that. So 2 Kings chapter 25 and verse 27. So May, if you could read that for us. 2 Kings 25:27.
Now it came about in 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah.
Jehoiachin, I'm sorry. Jehoiachin, yeah. Very similar names.
In the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison.
Go ahead and read through the end of that chapter. Go ahead and read 28 through 30 also.
And he spoke kindly to him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes, and had his meals in the king's prisons regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, A regular allowance was given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life.
Okay, and we have Babylonian records about these allowances for the king of Judah. But here's what I want to call your attention to. You'll notice that at a certain point, Jehoiakim, who was taken exile during the first siege that Daniel talks about, the first couple of verses of Daniel, he was finally released from prison and then given some exaltation. He was given some comforts and luxuries were accorded to him, but it wasn't by Nebuchadnezzar. It was by one of his successors, Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, one of the successors of Nebuchadnezzar. If Nebuchadnezzar himself had so completely, as you might assume, so completely been moved to praise and respect the God of Israel and of Judah, it is somewhat surprising that he would leave that King Jehoiakim, who was only 18 years old when he was taken into exile, that he would leave him in sort of harsh prison conditions until a successor on the throne would have to release him. See what I mean? It doesn't mean that he hadn't become more favorable, but the favorability of the Jews with the Babylonians was steadily increasing during that whole time, even through and after the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And that's what I mean, that Nebuchadnezzar is being made to stand for more than just himself. It's sort of the entire dynasty of Babylon that was sort of won over a bit. You see what I mean? To the respect for the Jews and their beliefs, their God even. We don't have all the details of that, but... So anyway, but we'll get into more of that, but we begin to see how certain themes are working in Daniel. I hope that helps. Let's close with prayer. Father, thank you for the record we have of your dealings with your people that assure us that the future will be one of salvation and of peace for those who love your Son, and in his name we pray. Amen. Please do subscribe if you haven't done so. Give us your likes and your comments, and we will see you here next time.